Aboriginal people had an economy for many, many thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans. They were trading foods and other resources, but there was also a spiritual and cultural dimension to their interactions economically. When Europeans arrived in New South Wales, the frontier, starting in Sydney in 1788 and taking decades to spread violently throughout the state, really disrupted Aboriginal ways of life quite profoundly, from the violence itself, but also the dispossession of lands. But Aboriginal people responded in the wake of that frontier in a very culturally informed way. They tried to stay as much as possible living on their own traditional country, and they tried to live as much as possible under their own terms. A good example of how Aboriginal people adapted to this new colonial world was a Sydney man from Botany Bay named Marut, who, along with his wife, whose name we sadly haven't got recorded, set up a fishing business in the 1830s after working on whaling ships. He was a man who had been born just after the arrival of Europeans. He'd seen and experienced that huge impact of that arrival and the dispossession and disease and violence. But he responded by setting up his own business. He also was given a lease of land on Botany Bay, where he built a hut for his wife and himself, and built several other huts which he then started to rent out to local fishermen. So he was a landlord collecting rent from those huts, as well as making profit from his fishing business and running tour guiding services around Botany Bay as well. That's an example of someone who responded in a way that kept him on country and using the skills and knowledge that he already possessed. The economic history of Aboriginal people has been overlooked alongside the broader histories of Aboriginal people in New South Wales since 1788. A long-standing belief, incorrect, but it refuses to go away, that Aboriginal people somehow are not able to change without losing their authenticity. And so it stops us from seeing these really creative responses that Aboriginal people made to the situation they found themselves in colonial New South Wales, and particularly stops us seeing that these responses were also culturally informed. So they weren't an abandonment of traditional ways, they were actually a continuation and an adaptation.